With our windows and door model, now we need to generate a UV map. But before we do, we're going to put the doorknob on this as well. And I'll start by turning off the walls with the exception of the one with the door. And then I'm going to go to the orthographic view where I'm looking at this edgewise. So that'll be in the front view. I'll select the part of the door, the frame of the door itself, and I'll hit F on the keyboard to get on top of that. Now to make the doorknob, we're going to review using the curve tool. I'll hold down the space bar, going to create curve tool, CV curve tool, attributes. And I'm going to set it for 1, linear. Now anywhere in this view, I'll go ahead and I'll start to draw what I want the doorknob to kind of look like. Always putting more vertexes than I really need. It's easier to delete. I'll right click and choose Control Vertex. If I wanted to, I could kind of start to edit this at this point. I can always edit it once the geometry is done as well. I'll return to the object mode. I'll center the pivot and freeze the transforms, delete the history. Now to move it where I like it to revolve it from, which will be down here, I'll hold down D on the keyboard and I'll relocate the pivot point there. Now I'm going to be revolving on the x-axis. Holding down the space bars, I'll go to Surfaces, Revolve Attribute, and I'll set it for X. And I want to make sure I've chosen polygons. And then quads, count, I'll leave the default of 200 and click Apply. I'll center the pivot again, and now I'll put it against the door. Now if I wanted to, I could hold down D and V and locate that pivot where it would meet the actual door panel. Now I'll start to scale it and put it into position. I need to make the beveled panel that the doorknob goes against. I'll go to the front view in the orthographic, and I'll hold down my space bar. I'll create a polygon cube, click and drag the footprint I want. Going to my perspective view, I'll give it a little thickness. I'll hit F on the keyboard. I don't need the back face, so I'll select it and I'll delete it. I'll select the front one, and hitting R on the keyboard, I'll use my scale tool to put that bevel, and I'll move it back. I'll return to my object mode, and I'll get it into the general area by holding down V, and I'll snap it to the door. And now I can start to put it into position. I'm going to return to my orthographic views to get this a little bit more precise. Take a minute to scale the doorknob a little bit more appropriately. And I'll push this right against the door, and I'll save. I'll delete the history of both pieces of geometry. And next we'll go ahead and we'll create the UV maps for the newly made door and windows and doorknob. Now I've gone in and I've deleted the history and frozen the transforms of the door, the window, and the doorknob in the little plate ahead of time. I'm going to put a new material on because we don't need that template anymore that we had originally. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I will key select everything, right clicking, holding down the mouse, going down to assign new material. I'll add an Arnold AI standard surface. I'll name it in the attributes. And then I'm going to make sure I've got my UV editor available. UV editor can be located at the top of the user interface. If I want to add it to my dock, I would hold Command Shift, click on UV editor. Now I can also hold down the space bar and go to the hot box and just do it this way if I chose. Either way, we're going to be using that. Now I'll start by selecting the window, and I'll go to UV, planar, attribute, and I have to set mine for the x-axis. It's always the axis that's perpendicular to the surface. Setting it for X, I'll hit apply. I'll leave the window up because I have to do the door as well. Now I'll go to the channel box. And in the channel box, I make sure that the number for projection width and height is the same. I'll start off with 11 for both. And now if I was to go to my UV editor, there's my window. Now everything's going to be ganged up in here, including the walls again. So what I'll probably want to do now is take that surface and I'll pull it off outside that gray box. And maybe I'll start to scale it a bit. I'll return to my object mode in my viewport and I'll select the door. I'll go to UV and I'll go to planar. It's already set for X. I'll hit apply and I'll change the projection width and height to 11. Going to the editor, I'll take the door and I'll just put the door up here. I'll scale it a little bit. In my viewport, I'll return to the object mode, select the door frame, and same thing, I'll hit apply. And then in my channel box, I'll be sure to change the projection width and height to the same number, and I'll pull that out here. And If you wanted to, you could do the same thing for the doorknob and the doorknob panel. What we'll do next is we'll return to our object mode for the entire model, hitting A on the keyboard, right-click Object Mode, and then I'll just go ahead and marquee select everything. Now the next task is to go to the UV editor, and you can see all the components in the UV editor now. So they all have to be scaled to fit in this gray box that we see here. This corner box that appears in the application, this is where the UV is generated. Anything outside of that, Photoshop will not recognize. So I'll start to select some of these UV shells by right-clicking, choosing UV shell. I'll select it, hitting W on the keyboard, and I'll just place it inside the box there. Marquee selecting anything with more than one piece. In this case, that was the door. And with the doorknob and the little plate for the doorknob, I'll just marquee select both of them, and I'll put them someplace out of the way. Selecting the frame, I'll put that here, and I'll scale it down. Now if I return to my object mode again, and the marquee select all the elements again, I can now generate the image map I need for Photoshop. I'll go to Image, UV Snapshot, making sure that I've got a PNG with the edge color black, and make the size at least 3000 by 3000. I'll browse to put it in my project folder, save, apply and close. If you get an error message when you try to click apply and close, it means you did not return to your object mode with your geometry. You're still in an editing state. I'll click apply. The next thing we'll do is we'll be bringing this into Photoshop where we'll start to develop the textures for it.